Welcome back. So I borrowed a book from the library, and the title is John Lewis Alive, and it's written by David Greenberg. I hope you're fortunate enough to be near a library that has the book in case you want to read it. And I'll not be reading the book in order. I'll pick areas that I deem important and read them to you. Starting. John Lewis was born on February 21st, 1940 in Pikes County, a rural swatch of southeast Alabama, where his mother's family had lived for generations. His great-great-grandparents, Elizabeth, or Betts or Betty, and Tobias, Toby, if you watch Roots, you know someone was forced to take the name Toby. They had been enslaved, owned by a man named Joel Carter. Many years later, Joel's granddaughter, Sarah Abernathy, wrote about the emancipation of Tobias and Elizabeth at the end of the Civil War. Quote, "Not being a secessionist at heart, Grandfather Carter didn't answer Jefferson Davis's call for cotton." Explanation: Grandfather was a Confederate, but a mild Confederate. He did not really commit treason by wanting to break away from the U.S. over the slavery question. Continuing, he had expected his whelp to be grown in slaves and too anxious for their health to allow his overseer to drive them, but allow them to be worked enough to produce their upkeep and a little cotton which he stored. Explanation, she's saying, yes, he was an enslaver, but he was the most benevolent of enslavers. Continuing, before the onset of federal raiders, his Negroes, she wrote that, hid it among some difficult hills and gulches, all cotton grown by him after the federal blockade. So he was a very principled man, though he was breaking the law by continuing to grow cotton after he was told not to do so. His Negroes were loyal to Old Master, and she wrote Old Master. They refused to betray the place where they had cows, hogs, meat, and lard hidden. Betts the cook armed herself with an axe and stood by the door and defied the Yanks to pester Old Master or the family or to enter his home. For her loyal and militant protection, with her freedom, she and her husband were given a piece of land, a cabin, and supplies till they could grow more. Said my grandfather, "They have grown old in my service. My children are young and are able to get for themselves what Betts and Toby are too old and feeble to earn for themselves." Sounds great, except that Betts didn't need to get these things because she was militant and loyal. She needed to have gotten wages, and so all the enslaved people should have been repaired for how they were armed. I will continue. Because Carter had given Tobias and Elizabeth a modest-sized plot, John Lewis's ancestors possessed land of their own. Over the following decades, they bought more of it. 76 acres here, 228 acres there. Sounds like they're on the come up, right? They're gone from poverty, forced poverty of slavery, to owning 228 acres. Always remember the context that we're in the U.S. So when you see black people on the rise, what is the U.S. going to do? Eventually, though, they were forced to sell the land. And when John was born, his parents were working as tenant farmers for a white man named Josh Copeland. And being a tenant farmer is just a step away from being enslaved. So the black people rose up and they're brought down. Now, it doesn't say how they were forced, but history tells us that the U.S. government directly or complicitly aided the robbery and theft of black people's land from them, as they did with the indigenous people. Besides claiming their own property when freedom came, the Carters, then in their mid-40s, also claimed their right to marry on December 16, 1865. Until then, the South chattel slavery system had barred slaves from legal unions, although many, like the Carters, were considered married in the eyes of their communities. Even though slaveholders often broke up families, selling a spouse or a child to a plantation or household far away, they could not extinguish the human desire to wed. Black couples took wedding vows and performed rituals like jumping the broomstick. Another way of saying it, jumping the broom. A custom long associated with extra-legal unions. Informal marriage thrived even as legal marriage was prohibited. End quote. When the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery was ratified on December 6, 1865, Black couples hurried to consecrate their bonds. Some had children whom they wished to make legitimate. Others wished to qualify for soldiers' pensions or land allotments. Others simply wanted to exercise their newly won rights. In some parts of the South, the demand for nuptials was so great that mass weddings took place. As many as 70 couples tied the knot at once. Among the first to obtain a wedding certificate were Tobias and Betty Carter. Another first for the family, Alabama archives also document yet another step that Tobias Carter took as a free man. In March 1865, 3 years before the 15th Amendment was ratified, allowing black men to vote, the U.S. Congress passed the Reconstruction Act, which required Confederate states, as a condition for rejoining the Union, to grant the vote to all men regardless of race. Under military direction, boards of registrars enrolled voters. That summer, Tobias Carter registered. But this is America, so wait for the twist. Within a generation, however, Tobias and other black men across Alabama were systematically stripped of their rights. In 1874, white supremacist Democrats took control of the state government and established a Redeemer regime. Through new laws and extra-legal violence, or white terrorism, they disenfranchised black citizens. Thus began the Jim Crow era and long deferral of full freedom for Tobias and Betty and their progeny. So I'm going to stop here. Just wanted you to get the twists and turn. People try to rise, the government and white supremacy knocks them down. People try to rise, the government and white supremacy tries to knock them down. Tell me what you think. Thanks so much for listening.